Okay.
Oh, sorry.
So, hi everyone. This is a extra stream I just announced it half an hour ago on Patreon with my top supporter, Mark, actually. He has a bit of a weird availability compared to the other patrons, so I decided to give him the chance to talk to me exclusively. And because I thought that you might all be interested in that, I will live stream and record our conversation. So again, I'm very honored to have you here, Mark. Maybe do you want to just introduce yourself very quickly and say how you first found out about Citybound? And then we can get right started. Either like maybe you have some questions already, or I definitely have some questions for you. So let us know who you are.
Well, I've been playing city simulation games for time, and so I was on the Simtropolis website and found the Citybound thread a couple of years ago, and I felt that it was a project that looked like it might be going somewhere compared to a lot of the others, and it gave me a lot of hope. So I decided to give up my own little project, which I was making, and support behind it because it seemed to be one that was going somewhere.
Yeah, very nice. And I remember you being there from the very beginning, supporting me from the very beginning, even long before I started the whole Patreon thing. So yeah, let me just take this opportunity to say thank you for all of the support. You can't imagine how weird and amazing it is to just get such kind of support from a stranger across the internet. And yeah, I just want you to know that it helps me a lot, especially like the trust and motivation that it brings me. So
yes, thank you.
Sure. So you said you had some prepared questions. Do you want to start with these?
Yeah, I jotted down a few things. I mean, so in the simulation, are you planning to simulate a sim or a citizen or whatever from birth to death, and being like a unique sim for like? So every sim is going to be a single sim that's going to die and have a whole life.
Exactly.
Is that going?
And I mean, maybe I'm not sure if actually for all sims you will witness birth and death, because in a city context you of course also have the events of someone who is already, I don't know, at some certain age moving in or moving out if the situation is bad. But yeah, what you meant is exactly my goal, that you can follow the whole life of a citizen.
Yes.
Yeah.
So every citizen is simulated. There's no representative. Yes, right.
And maybe to elaborate a little bit on that, because in theory, I mean, the SimCity 2013 also simulated every citizen, but they didn't have a persistent job or even home. They just went to whatever closest job or home. So just to clarify, like, no, when I say I want to simulate every single citizen as a citizen, I actually want their life to be a persistent life, to have a persistent job until they decide to change it, of course, but you should be able to follow them throughout several days of their life, and it should make sense as a consistent, coherent life.
Great. Next thing was cities. I mean, in reality, cities tend to evolve over time, and obviously that every city has its history. I was wondering, planning to have it like in, say, SimCity 2000, where you begin in, say, 1900, and you've already got, railroads and everything, or are we going to build our cities from a time at any particular time, or is technology going to sort of unlock itself, or are we going to just be building in the modern era?
That's a really good question, and I'm not completely sure about it yet, but I tend to, at least for the beginning, focus on just the modern area, but with some additional complexities to it, because especially as a European, like, for example, historic city centers are something very defining and important for a city.
Yes.
And so I think the solution which I want to go for first is to have the gameplay happen only in the modern area, but in most cases you will start off with some kind of existing city which has historical parts newer parts, completely new parts even, or in the case of like an agricultural village that stayed pretty much the same over the centuries. But the idea is to not have that much technological development during gameplay. So in a way, you're kind of in a frozen point in history and time. Of course, it would be very interesting, both if you go back into the past and into the future, to experiment with developments of technology. I mean, what a lot of people now are talking about is like how autonomous cars will change cities, for example. And I think this is really the realm of mods, where both for historic settings as well as for future things, mods can explore this. And if it turns out to work really well, I might decide to expand the game by including that. But the way the game is built, you could, in theory, just take it, and with some effort, of course, you could build like an ancient city builder based on that.
Yes, that's very good. Question: as it's a browser-based game, will you need to have a live internet connection to play it?
So it's actually not a browser-based game anymore. Ever since I re-implemented it in Rust, it's now running as a completely normal native game, also making full use of your computer's performance. Regarding,
so is it
yeah, sorry.
Is it an offline game then? So primarily.
Primarily it's an offline game, but since you mentioned servers, and I already elaborated on this in the previous live stream yesterday, I really wanted to be possible to collaborate on a city by having the city run on several computers, but that could just mean like several computers in your local network, or several servers in the web which you connect to with the game. But yes, it's a primarily offline game which will have multiplayer collaboration, but you're completely free to set that up however you want. So there's no requirement for an online connection at all.
Going back to the idea of like how cities evolve over time, with like zoning and developing new parts of the city, like procedurally generating a neighborhood, or for development with roads and evolves to an extent intelligent.
You mean like while you're already building the city, you would use some kind of very complicated tool that will automatically generate a whole chunk of the city for you?
Well, yeah, I mean something that would, like, you could say that up an area into a residential area, and it would create something with roads and so forth that as a tool for like making a neighbor or something. Like, just an idea I had. It's not.
Yeah, sure. How would you expect this tool to behave? Like, which kind of, for example, style of roles should it choose? How does it know whether it should be high density or low density zoning? Or what would be your expectations for this tool?
I had a sort of idea that like you could zone an area as being, for instance, like a suburban residential area, and then within that area there would be like you know how your drawing tools, you select an area, and it's quite within that area it would like grow something within it, like sort of organically, like sort of grow it, like, I don't know, like you've got a main road, and then you say off of that main road you want to have like something grow from that, like a development. I don't know, it's just an idea I had. As I say, it's not, anything big or anything, but
I mean, it's really interesting because since, like I said earlier, I want to have a kind of existing city core at the beginning of the game, I need to have some kind of auto generation anyways, right? So
yes,
it could be really interesting to take this generation and make it a tool for the player to very quickly create new areas of the city. I'm just not quite sure how to make sure that it will actually build something that will fit to the player city. But then again, I will have to invent a generation that creates like plausible initial cities anyways. So again, there could be a lot of overlap in the requirements.
Yes, yes, very good.
And if I may, yeah, just one more comment about this idea. I think it's really interesting what happens to a city building game when you have such a tool and all of the very tedious work that you usually have of building roads, which I personally enjoy. But what kind of a game does it become if that's not the thing you spend most of the time on? That's just an interesting thought.
Yes, yes. It's just an idea. I mean, it's not very drawing to the game, obviously, but yeah, I mean, maybe it's not.
Sure. Sorry for interrupting you. What did you want to continue with?
Well, just I jotted down a few ideas. Weather and climate and seasons, like how much impact is that going to have, like on resources, like farms and such? Is there going to be much of a impact, or is that just really mainly?
I mean, if it's possible at all, and it is definitely possible, why wouldn't it impact all kinds of businesses, and not just businesses, but also transport, like people having more trouble getting around in winter when there's lots of snow, for example. And for me, like one of the main reasons to have seasons is not just like that it looks nice aesthetically, but because I actually, just based on my own experience, feel like a city functions slightly differently in each season, and to really understand the city as a whole, you kind of need to be able to witness how it works throughout all seasons. No, that's kind of my motivation behind it.
Good guess. It's really all the things I thought something. I didn't really think of many specific.
Sure, but these were already some great topics. I don't know. Did you have a chance to watch what we talked about yesterday in the stream?
I briefly this morning I looked at the summary you wrote on Patron, and some interesting things like procedural buildings and zoning and so forth. I didn't actually watch the.
Okay, sure.
Time, but...
Okay, so I have a couple things that I would actually like to ask you. So since first, again, like just because of how much you support Citybound, and also because of your own project that you had started back then, what would be your hopes, or what exactly are your hopes for Citybound? What, let's say, when it is in some way or form done, what would confirm to you that it actually became what you wanted it to become? Like, what are the most critical elements of your vision for it, maybe?
Well, essentially, I mean, after SimCity 4, obviously, there was all this hype about SimCity 5, and when 2013 came out, obviously it was the glass box was the big thing, the agent-based simulation, and that of agent-based, of having everything being an actual concrete unit rather than just a general representation. That was the main idea that I was very interested in.
Mm-hmm. And this is... Sorry, you were cut off for a second. Could you repeat the last sentence, please? After that, agent-based was the main idea.
Yes. If you could have a game that was allowing the same amount of creativity as, you know, SimCity, but it had an agent-based system that was actually, unlike 2013, that actually did things properly, rather than having Sims, you know, change their job halfway through the day or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and obviously didn't have the silly map size they had there. I mean, if you had something like that that has the creativity of the existing games, but the actual agent-based systems, that was the main idea.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's reassuring to hear, because that's the main thing that I'm trying to focus on, of course. Maybe apart from that, and like if you have no idea, that's completely fine, because I honestly myself don't have a lot of ideas. Apart from just like fulfilling the promise maybe that SimCity 2013 had, what would be some things that you would like to be in Citybound that haven't been in this genre ever? Or what would be something really new that you would like to see?
Well, I mean, the biggest idea, obviously, was what we discussed earlier about, historically how cities grow over time, and that was probably the only other big have been, a city start for a reason, because there was a resource of that location, and then it developed over time. And rather than just, whereas in like SimCity 4, you've got all these modern resources, and you just start laying down a city like in Dubai,
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think that actually what most of us want with SimCity 5 is, a good successor to 4, to have something that does, I mean, I don't know that I can think of anything that's other than what everybody's suggested already. I think, there's been a lot of great suggestions.
No, yeah, and I don't know, maybe we can elaborate on a couple of these points. Like, okay, I said earlier that I want to focus on the modern area, but of course, the two things you mentioned, the development of the city and the city starting out at first for a reason. What exactly do you envision there? Like, for example, what different kinds of scenarios, realistic scenarios for a city could you imagine?
Yes,
as a starting point, yeah.
I grew up in Sydney, and of course Sydney was, founded as a colony. So of course you came there and there was nothing there, and they started building things. But of course at the time it was old technology. So I mean, when I was growing up, playing SimCity, I'd always imagine that cities would be founded a couple of 100 years ago, and then of course you've got cities like London, where I live in England now, and they've been there they probably started in prehistoric times. So obviously it's like, at what point does a city really begin? Because you could have some cultural area that had a couple of huts there, and then it evolves into London. But with a game, obviously you need to start with something. I mean, in like SimCity 4, you've got this blank field of nothing. There's no animals, there's no plants, there's nothing. But obviously I think it's a good idea to start with something where there's a point for the city being there, where there's like a river or a mill or a resource of some kind, a trading post or what have you. But,
yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And it's funny that, like you said, in Sydney it was probably, and I guess in America is the only other kind of example where you actually have these cities that were built on an empty plot of land by some developers, and which were planned pretty much in one chunk. But I completely agree with you that we need these starting, these very interesting different kinds of starting scenarios for a city. What has been really interesting for me now as I'm developing the economy simulation is that I think you should be able to pretty accurately describe why exactly in a certain scenario, like you said, a trading post or a mill or something, a city actually has the potential to get started. Because you can look at the individual actors' demands and needs, and also the demands and needs of the neighboring cities, and in a way the difference or the gradient between them, and in this like almost like an energy potential for life, you could make use of that to get a city started, but you as the player would have to understand that there is the potential for that. So maybe to shift the topic a little bit into this area, assuming that, and because this wasn't possible before, this would definitely be something new, assuming that each individual actor actually works accurately and you can learn something from their needs and demands and how they change their lives over time. What would you actually like to be able to see or learn from looking at individual citizens or businesses?
Well, I mean, obviously, a emergent behaviour is a thing. I mean, obviously you've got. I mean, if you've got say you've got a city that founds itself because I don't know, a military camp, you know, or whatever, and you've got these people who have their jobs, they've got their thing, but anyway, situations change, and say I don't know, the frontier expands westwards, and this city's no longer a military post, so these people have got to, you know, find some other. I mean, as a mayor, as the player, you obviously, you know, you got to think, well, I've got these people who are suddenly unemployed, let's give them something to work on, or blah blah blah. I mean, it's like in SimCity 2000, you had the scenarios that had these problems, and you have to work about. Now, this city's got, you know, too much pollution. How do I fix that, etc., etc. I mean, when you start a game, I suppose you'd have a situation waiting to be taken advantage of by the player. Or, you know, there's some sort of things happening in the city to do more to attract immigrants to the city. You know, like a mine opens up nearby or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to make the game interesting from the beginning, it's crucial to have a lot of these initial interesting scenarios. And I mean, what would be even better than having a couple of fixed scenarios like for SimCity would be to actually have a kind of generator for scenarios, where you could actually create a map with some initial difficulties or problems in mind.
Yes.
So to maybe shift onto something completely different, and I mean, the reason why we're having this talk one-on-one now is because even though you're in the UK, as I understood, you're working night shifts.
Yes.
And funnily enough, this was actually something that I thought about quite a bit when designing the economic model, how to account or how to even make it possible to have agents which have night shifts, because some very simple logic would assume that all people kind of work and go to sleep at the same place. But then what happens to the simulation once you start to have people who work night shifts? And just because I'm not familiar with that at all, like, how does that change your life compared to a normal person, in quotes?
Well, I mean, for me, obviously, I sleep during the day, but obviously, you know, if I have to do something during the day, I can stay up and get a bit less sleep. But I mean, the thing with simulation, obviously, if you're going to have a realistic case where people are working at realistic hours rather than everybody works at the same time and commutes at the same time, I mean, you've got to consider the fact that, like, even during the dead of night, you've got, like, the police are going to have people. There's going to be people working at hospitals. There's going to be people working on the railways, nightclubs. You know, there are obviously going to be businesses that are still active at night. Obviously, you've got all sorts of businesses have different hours. You know, there's part-time work. There's, you know, this, that, and the other. So obviously, it's quite complicated. I mean, I expect everybody to have, you know, an obvious solution to a problem. But I mean, obviously, when you've got regulation, obviously things sort of grow themselves. So, you know, you've got market from a farm, and then, you know, people work at the market, then people go shopping at the market. So everything happens for a reason. So these emergent behaviours sort of arise, and then you can say, well, hang about, everybody's doing this in a way that's a bit unrealistic, and you see how you tweak that. But I mean, obviously, I can't suggest some magical solution on that.
No, sure. I think my question was more about, and I don't know if that's too personal, feel free to just not answer that, but what's the kind of decision process to start becoming a night shift worker? Because just from the point of view from me implementing the economic system, like, I want each individual person to, like, compare different workplaces, and for daytime workplaces, it's pretty easy to compare them. You see how far they're away, how much they will pay. Maybe you can take some advantage because there's some shops on the way to work or on the way from work. Lots of other factors, but they seem pretty simple for me to compare. Whereas if you would have to consider a workplace where you would have to work night shifts, you would pretty radically reorder your whole life. And
Well,
how to even compare that to each other?
Yes, I mean, well, the night shift pays a little bit more than the day shift, so there is an incentive in that. I mean, when I applied at the store, I applied for a lot of positions they had going because it's a big store. They had day positions, they had night positions. And at the interview, they said, "Oh, would you like to do nights?" And they said, "Oh, it pays more." And I said, "Okay, I'll do it." So it was just, I was willing to do it and it paid more. So I went with that. I mean, I would have easily accepted a day position. You know, it's just availability.
So basically, you could do it just because you were flexible enough to do it, and you like the incentive worked for you.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, cool. I don't know. That was maybe an oddly detailed question, but just something that I found interesting because I actually was thinking about how to implement that. And I mean, in general, I will have to make some simple assumptions and try to get a very simple model working first, which is what I will actually do. So first, there will not be nighttime night shift workers, just because I want to be able to control what is happening at all, and then things like this could be gradually introduced. And I think, I mean, you're just one example, but I think there's many different things in the city happening where I will actually need feedback from people who experience that to see if what's happening in my simulation makes any sense at all.
Yes.
So regarding this conversation, do you feel like that's something that you would like to do more often? Do you think you have some more or detailed questions, or for example, would you need to see a new prototype of the game before you have some more questions? I'm trying to understand both for the regular patrons calling as well as fast, maybe what would be a good rhythm if one is needed at all.
I don't believe that, obviously, I don't really have any technical expertise that could help with the project. I programmed my own project in another language and a different way, but I mean, you know, I don't really mind whether we have these live streams or not for me. But you know, if you want to have a live stream, then if I'm awake at the time, I'll join. I mean, I don't believe that I've got anything more to contribute than anybody else really to the discussion, and I can do that at the Reddit thread.
I was trying to more just gauge your personal curiosity, because like you raised some very interesting points, and I was just wondering because like I'm developing this concept in my head for years, and I have lots of ideas about all kinds of different aspects or details, and I just wonder, is there something that I didn't think about at all that is like a very important topic to you, or maybe there's something that could become interesting to you if you knew that I already thought about it. But I think I liked the conversation quite well today, so maybe you can just let me know in a couple days or weeks if you have become curious again in a way. And maybe similarly to the, like I did yesterday in the live stream, maybe something to end on. What kind of feedback do you have for me regarding the development and my communication with the community? Like I also said yesterday, there's lots of things that I'm aware of that I want to improve, but probably there's some things which I'm completely unaware of. So just, I don't know, what frustrates you, or what would you like to see improved?
Well, I'll say this, that every other project I've ever seen, every other game I've ever seen, you know, independent city simulation project, they've all failed. And I mean, what you're doing is exceptional compared to any of the competition. There is no competition. I mean, I can't. I certainly wouldn't say I was frustrated. I mean, I'm very happy with your dedication to the project and your work ethic and your communication with the community. I think it's very great. So no, I certainly don't have anything bad to say about that at all there.
And you don't even have a suggestion for how to improve it, because I certainly feel myself that I could do a lot better still.
Well, obviously these live streams are great. I mean, I personally don't have any much technical. Well, I'm not great with maths, so I wouldn't be very helpful with the actual program itself. But I mean, you know, obviously the live streams are a good idea for able to offer that sort of inputs that's of constructive nature. I mean, I think what you're doing now, the current path is very good, and I hope it carries on. So
perfect. Then thank you very much for the nice conversation, and I hope you will join us again soon. And enjoy your day or night,
thank
I
you.
guess.
You too.
All right, bye.